Hey guys, Jessica Henry here. Wanted to welcome you back today to my studio. I am going to work on a portrait and I thought it'd be kind of fun to do. This is my great-great-grandfather, William Otto. And so I'm going to do this today, kind of like I did that one in that last portrait video I did a few weeks ago. Just real tonalist study. I'm only going to use burnt sienna and ultramarine blue today and a little bit of the solvent. I use Gamsol just to thin it down. So I'm going to work on that and I'll talk a little bit about measuring and how I try to get that sculptural feel. All right, thanks for joining. All right, so here is the palette that I'm using. I won't be using all these colors today, mostly just the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I'm starting with the small brush on a toned canvas that is toned with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, a little yellow ochre. And I use some Gamsol. That is Gamsol in that little container. This is my photo reference. I have it on fast forwards. I'm speaking fast. So I start with a sort of an inky, soupy mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Get it thinned down. And I'm thinking about the size and placement where I want to put him within the confines of this rectangle. Keeping my brush very loose so that I can move things, rearrange things as I need to. I'm just thinking where would be an attractive place to put him with enough space above his head and around the sides of his face so that he fits comfortably in that composition. And even though I'm not really working on getting anything super accurate at this moment, I'm just starting to lay in the basic skull shape. So once I'm satisfied with the location of how he sits in the canvas, I focus then on the eye sockets and where I perceive those should be within the confines of the loose skull shape that I've put down. So I'm just, if I had a model or even from the photograph, I'm squinting down, trying to get that exact shape of how the eyebrows line the eye socket hole, and then also down below where the bottom of the eye socket is. That is always an identifying feature on every human being. Everyone's eye socket's a little bit different, and so I'm always looking for those little subtle angles and to help just really capture a likeness. And so getting what I call this triangle, the two eyes and the nose, the accurate distance relationships, that is paramount in the very beginning. So that's kind of what I'm working on here in this beginning passage. And of course, it's hard to work on one thing without working on another thing. So I'm looking at the way the forehead goes up and the cheekbones go down, and just getting that contour there a little more accurate as I see it. And then I will be talking a little bit more about values and no-tan in this video, but for now I'm just focusing on getting the right value relationships of the shadow of the eye sockets. If you get the values too dark in a portrait, it can give the illusion of it being misshapen. So if your light is one value intensity and then you make your shadows too dark, it will look wrong. Our brain just sort of picks it up as there's a bizarre contortion to the face, like it sinks way back into the skull. So you have to be watching how those relationships connect to each other. And right now I'm just trying to get the shape of that whole value passage, the shadow passage over on the far side accurate. And I'm measuring the width of that shadow space to how long it is, using the width as a gauge. So there's the width, and there's one part of it, and there's another part. So it's like 1 7/8 long as it is wide. And so that's what I'm measuring. And all of these little measuring things that I do, you'll see me doing quite a few in here. I'm taking the width of the rectangle and I'm measuring how far over again. When I say rectangle, I mean that shadow passage. It's kind of a rectangular shape. So I took that width and measured how far over the other eye is from using that as a gauge. And so those are little things that I picked up at the atelier. All of those things help speed up your process. And so I'm measuring how many over. Once I get an area in the painting that I feel is fairly accurate, I call that my truth. It's what I'm going to gauge everything else off of. So I worked on getting that passage of that shadow over there accurate, and now I'm using it to measure across how many those are wide the face is, how tall the face is. I'm using now both the spectrum of both the eyes as a gauge. So two eyes, the eye sockets. From the eye socket down, how far down is the chin? So there's my eye sockets. And how far down? So that's, the chin was a little below where my thumb landed. Or the tip of the brush, I mean. So that gives me the length. And that's how I can get some of these things done faster. I would never project an image onto the canvas. I don't even know how. So I'm also taking my brush and checking where things are across from each other. So if I were to take, at the atelier, we would take plumb lines, and we'd hold them obviously up and down, but we'd also hold them across too, just to see where different lines intersect or don't intersect with each other. I thought that I would insert a few paintings every now and then just to illustrate some of the points that I'm making. This is a self-portrait I did using the same technique about 1.5 years ago. Looking at the background and the negative space to help me with getting those angles and shapes accurately. Now I'm just kind of cleaning up some of my marks. Just working on that. Looking how that line, the contour of the face, continues down into the neck. And just making those observations of where the neck intersects with the chin. And I also am looking at where his collar hits his chin and things like that. He's got this fabulous mustache. Was very excited to get going on painting that because it's just really cool. Showing restraint because there's other things. Before you can start adding features onto a face or a body, you have to get the skeletal structure underneath accurate. Otherwise, it just won't read properly. So I'm working on getting the shape of the chin and the jawline in there a little more accurate. All the while, I'm thinking too about, I always mention having a concept when you begin a painting. And in this painting, this gentleman is my great-great-grandfather, William Otto. And I didn't know him, obviously. But, you know, I just think I would love to have known him. And I was trying very hard to capture what personality I could glean out of the photograph. And, you know, as a concept, especially with portrait, you're always trying to get the character of the subject. And when you don't know the character, you have to do the best you can to gauge from what you can perceive from the eyes. And I understand he was a farmer, and he was also German. So, you know, what can you gauge from that? Yeah, I'm painting with left hand and right hand too. So not to confuse you, but sometimes I paint with both. Well, the one is clean and dry, so I'm kind of using it to rub things out. And the other one has a little bit of color in it. All right, well, anyway, getting back to that, having a concept, I definitely wanted to try to capture William Otto's personality, but and also just to create an interesting painting that had sort of an interesting feel, maintaining that idea of it being a historical photograph. So I kept this painting specifically in this tonal range. I didn't really play with very much color. The picture wasn't staying. The problem with taping a photograph to a wet canvas is it just doesn't want to stick. So you'll see here I kind of keep getting more and more tape on this. But I like having the photograph right there. All right, what I'm beginning to do here, as you've been probably noticing, is I have a little Gamsol on my brush, and I'm using that. I put a little bit onto the painting and I rub out where I want a lighter value. And you can see the painting starts to take on more sculpture. And this is one of the things that I just love doing. It's a very simple approach. You know, you just have the toned canvas, you darken your drawing in, not with a pencil, you just use the Gamsol and the paint, and then you rub out areas that are of a lighter value. And very quickly you end up with something that starts to look like a finished painting, and I just really enjoy that. And sometimes you have to work that Gamsol into the canvas weave, and that's what I'm doing here. I'll rub some in and then I'll sort of wipe it out. I'm using the paper towel every bit as much as a brush, because you can gently wipe, or you can rub just a little, or rub hard to get that brighter, cleaner spot. And so kind of just refining the shape of the ear and getting some of those values in there a little more accurately. Values are really the heart and soul of a painting. You can have a painting with little or no color, and if your values are accurate, it's going to read accurately. And so that's what I'm working on the drawing on this painting, but I'm also really concentrating on getting those values right, because if they're not right, like I said, it's not going to read. Our brains understand that something isn't correct there. For example, his cheekbone here, I needed that a little darker value there to really offset that zygomatic bone there. As it comes up near the ear on the side there, I needed a little darker spot there. And that had too much texture, so I'm just smoothing that out on that shadowed side. Again here too, just cleaning out those eye socket places. The brushwork was a little too scratchy, and so it wasn't. When it's scratchy, you have varying degrees of value, and so I wanted that a little smoother. The bone comes around, the eye socket. Getting that skeletal structure is really how you're going to get that likeness. These few paintings here were done using the same method of putting the paint on and kind of rubbing it out, and then just glazing a little bit of color onto that. So that's what I'm working on here. I had a lot of fun with this painting. I just thought it was just such a kick. These, especially these old photographs too, they have this marvelous value and soft lighting. I love how the light was cascading from the top down. I always try to capture that. If you look, Rembrandt did that all the time. This beautiful, strong light on top, and the whole lower face was just in shadow. And that's the movement of light that I'm always preaching about, whether I'm painting a still life, a landscape, or a portrait. Capture that movement of light. It's evocative, and it's beautiful, and it's fleeting too. So get that moment. And so just refining some shapes in here. That mastoid muscle, the sternocleidomastoid, as it comes around behind the ear and wraps around the neck to the base at the clavicle, is one of my favorite muscles in neck portraiture. Getting the head attached to the neck properly is a difficult thing to do. So you always want to look to see where those muscles intersect, and they're always a little bit different on everybody, but in general, you have the muscle that attaches behind the ear and comes around to the front, lower. And then, so just make those observations of where you see the different values and how they hit the base of the neck and the chin. So I'm working on, again here, the trapezius, how it comes up behind the neck and attaches at the base of the neck. And that's reflective in underneath his jacket. So trying to be cognizant of that as it would connect from one side of the shoulder to the other. It seems kind of logical, but it's surprising how much those lines can end up being disjointed if you don't pay attention to the trapezius on the left side, how it connects to the right side. So just always kind of just check to make sure that those lines unite. So I'm working on his clothes, and I don't want them to be distracting. I don't want to paint them, just solid white or solid paint value. I just kind of suggested where they're going to go. And now I'm kind of playing around with that mustache a little bit, rubbing out some of the paint. I can't wait to get going on it. It's like how they put the weather report at the end of the news show. The mustache is kind of at the very end, so I get to that later. Just playing with it in the meantime, trying to get the structure of it in place. Rubbing that out, and then where the mustache hits the background back there, it's a darker value. It's sort of like if you've ever watched a tree, the trunk of a tree, how it has down on the bottom where you see the dark value of the trees behind it, it'll appear lighter, and then up towards the sky, the tree appears blacker because it's what's behind it. So in this case, we know his mustache is white. Up by his face where it's darker, it's going to appear whiter. In the background where it's lighter, it's going to appear darker, just like a tree trunk. So it's not picking up the light back there. Again, this whole thing is about values, studying where values are softer, where they're lighter, and don't go by what you know, go by what you see. So that's imperative. And of course, if he was sitting in front of me, you don't have everything spelled out the way you do in a photograph. In a photograph, it's not too hard just to look at it and take your time, measure, and just all that. So what I'm doing here is just kind of laying in some of that background so I get sort of that, I can play with the edges and just work in, those passages. Try to make him feel like he's in his environment as soon as possible. So I will work from the edge of the head and the top of the head over to the edge fairly quickly after laying him in. This whole portrait painting, this whole video, I spent a few hours on the actual painting. This wasn't an all-day thing. But again, if you just take your time in the beginning, measuring, have a concept, know what it is you want to say about your portrait, and if you could just have those two things, concentrate on everything you're laying out, what it is you want to say, and then once you get his structure in, then you focus on the values. I'm also just checking my drawing as I go too. I'll lay the brush vertical, horizontal, just to make sure that nothing got sort of wonky as I was painting. So I zoomed in. I thought it'd be time to work on the eyes. I think everything else was at a good solid place. And I'm beginning now this passage. It was a nice middle tone, darkish middle tone value for the eye socket, so I'm grabbing a darker value now, and I'm pulling out the crease as I saw it under the brow bone, and then just as it comes around, looking at how it transitions from the eye socket to the outside of the eye socket, just getting that region there accurate. It'll of course it'll give him the lightness. There's his eyelid, and I want to pull that out and looking at how the eyelid tucks into the eye socket on the far side, getting the iris in place. Getting the iris in place is often a challenge. You don't want them going two different directions, so you flick your eye back and forth from each of the eyes, or even in this case from the photo reference to my painting. I'm always flicking my eye back and forth to see if there's any differences, and that's a nice trick you can use. It's just go fast, flick, 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 and some of the differences will jump out. And softening that transition of the eyebrow to the brow bone as it turns up into the forehead. You don't want it to be a strong, sharp line. It just kind of doesn't make sense. Okay, so here is my skull, and I'm pointing out this region in here. Look at how we have a natural sort of curl to that, and that's significant on capturing different likenesses too. Look at how that curve, there's that sharp accent, just calling attention to that. I want to pull that out. Studying all those little contours inside an eye socket is a fascinating study if you haven't taken the time to really observe those little angles and twists and turns of the skin and the folds and tucks. And so that's excuse me, that's all I'm working on in this passage here. Getting that eyeball to sit just properly within the socket. Thinking about how the skin is like if you picture a marble with clay wrapped around it. Just pulling out only the few highlights that are essential to get that feeling. I'm also trying to not play up the whole all of the wrinkles as much as I say them. It's just not essential, and it can get too fussy. Sometimes I see paintings and even sculptures where all I can say is when I look at them is it was too much observed. You got too fussy with these things, and now that's all we see. So when I look at the whole picture of my reference there, how much do I really see those wrinkles? I can zero in on them and see every little tiny detail, but it's not essential for the telling of the story. A few might be just to capture his age, but you don't want to take and get real fussy with a teeny little liner brush and all that because it just doesn't read properly. Again, it's selecting those things that are most important for the telling of the story, whether you're painting a landscape or a still life. Just choose those few things and then leave out the rest. So in this case, it was important that I got the depth of his eye socket accurate, because that to me told the age and the story better than the wrinkles. And I thought it was more interesting too. So I'm pulling out some of the highlights too that I see around the eyes with a little brush. So I dip it in the terps and kind of rub it on, wipe my brush off. What you don't see is I hold the paper towel in my other hand and I'm wiping it all the time just to clean it off. Otherwise, you're only smearing the stuff around. Pulling out some highlights inside there. And those really interesting shapes are not too hard to identify if you just squint down at your portrait, your reference. You can do this with a live model as well. It's just the same. Squinting down at your live model will flatten out their features and make it more like a photograph. So what I'm doing here is I'm just focusing on, on the nose and getting the ridge, highlight ridge along the nose. So I'm just getting that sparkle in his eye. I'll come back through and hit that with a brighter highlight later. Just cleaning off that, refining the shape of the bridge and the other eye now. And I have no problem resting my finger on my canvas on a passage that might not be totally done yet. Getting that other eye to look and track properly with the eye already done. Not an easy thing to do, but if you're making one eye, which you should, make one eye more dominant, the other eye less of the star. You got one that's a star of the show and the other's a supporting actor. So in this case, the one in the shadow is going to be quieter, less detail. I'm checking too to see if they're both in line with each other, and the one in the shadow is just a little bit further down. So all the while trying to keep my values really subtle in there so that nothing really jumps out and calls for attention. And where the eye socket tucks into the edge of the nose, I'm just making sure that value there doesn't get too dark. I know you can't, it's hard to tell from looking at this because the photo or the filming actually is a little bit off because it's to the side view. But I did actually make sure that that other eye was just a slight bit below that one. But so again, I'm just sort of refining some of the shapes and values back in this lower passage back there. Just keeping everything very tight and very closely related. Paying close attention to that bone structure of that eye socket as it goes out. So just cleaning up that definition back there and allowing it to do its part. This painting here I have just to illustrate more of that point of the values and getting that interesting tones. Just continuing on with the eyes. I really didn't take too much out of this video demonstration. I did fast forward everything, but I mean, as far as what I edited and subtracted out of here, is not much missing. So you kind of get the whole thing. And again, just lifting out paint and putting some back in, just being very subtle with those maneuvers. Refining shapes. And always it's just a game too with eyes, is jumping back and forth between one eye to the other. You have to flick your eye back and forth too in your painting. I mentioned that earlier about flicking your eye. So I'm just working on some accents and pulling in some darker spots here. All these little tiny details make a big difference, even though they're not real fussy. I'm not getting my little tiny brush out. I'm just letting them sort of season and flavor this whole passage in here. A few highlights, few accents. Really wanted that eye to just really stand out and be the star of the show. So that's what I'm working on in this area here. Cleaning up, pushing things back, pulling things forward. It's all about capturing that character, that essence. That's going to make a big difference in a portrait. This painting here is one where I really wanted to add to illustrate that point. It's not about every wrinkle, it's about telling the story through the eyes. This painting I called Deep Waters. And so getting back to the painting here, adding pigment, taking pigment out, just softening and losing edges. Even as the eye socket turns, I don't want to completely soften it so much that I lose the definition, but again, I have to have that clarity. And so just refining shapes again. And I didn't want to take away so much of this video here. I wanted to actually leave a lot of the actual painting process in this clip because I thought that, you know, it's important to see the entire process, and some parts of it do require a little bit more attention and finesse than the rest of the painting. So I decided to leave as much of this in as I can. Pushing that value back there a little bit darker so that it tucks in behind the bridge of the nose a little more. Refining likenesses, getting that as accurate as possible. Always holding the brush loose too. This is a painting I did last year. This clip here, she's about halfway through. And then this is the finished painting up close. Loved her eyes. I called this Inner Light. I pretty much used the same process that I'm using in this guy too. I actually love this technique for portraits because it has a softer feel, a little more suggested. And honestly, portraits can be really intimidating. And this process of painting, to me, seems to take a lot of the intimidation of painting a portrait out of it, because you're not jumping right into lots of color and lots of brushwork. You're just keeping it very simple. All you're focusing on is value and accuracy. Here's a close-up of the eyes. I did add a little bit of color to the eyes, a little blue in this shot. I get to that later in the video. But that gives you a little more idea of where I'm going with it. So if you haven't tried this technique of doing the beginning a portrait this way, it's fascinating. It's almost like a drawing, except you're painting the drawing on, and still thinking in terms of sculptural massing values and all that. So I'm working on the nose here, and that crease where the side of the cheek comes up and tucks into the nose, you want to make sure not to get that value too dark or too clarified, because it can start to look kind of sneery, like the person's sneering at you, and you don't want that. Especially since I want to keep the focus on the eyes, and I want that nose to come out. So if I made that value where the cheek curls up into the nostril too dark or too contrasting, it would have drawn the eye, and obviously we don't want that to happen. So I'm softening that line, and then pulling out highlights more and letting the highlights tell the story rather than the crease and the shadows and those little details that way. And so that is my dry brush, and I'm going in there and just kind of taking out some pigment, softening where I had put the turpentine down, and just making sure that those transitions have more of a cohesive feel and that the likeness is still there. Where the ball of the nose turns and curves under the nose, it just has these beautiful angles, and I love to play with that when painting noses. Just those little angles at the end of the nose. Cleaning up the bridge and that other eye. All the time, not wanting to lose his likeness or the value range. There's so many delicate little values here as I'm moving forward to finishing the painting. Again, as you're concentrating on the edges of the nose, right at the bridge down, right at the ball, you have it turning and going under, and I do a softer edge there. But on top, I'll pull out a sharper edge so that it has the feeling of sharp edge, look here, round edge, soft, don't look here. And then I'm using the mustache back there to help contour that side over there. And I shared this painting here just to contrast the difference between the two, and to share too how powerful this suggestion can be. Same with this lady. Loved her eyes, the sensitivity there. The edge of his whole side of the face over there in shadow, I'm looking for passages where I can lose edges to the background, and that's what I'm kind of focusing on in this passage here. Getting that contour right. And that's a little bit easier to do once I get that background in, which I don't do till a little bit later. Anxious to get going on that mustache. Facial hair is fun. I do have another painting that I show later on in this video where I'm working on facial hair on a man. And I'm darkening the value. So I'm just darkening the value over there under the mustache and under the nose, allowing that passage to receive more shadow as it's being cast in shadow from the nose. And then right where the bridge of the nose, or not the bridge, I forget what it's called, right under the nostril there's a bit of a highlight, so I want to pull that out a little. You don't need much detail, but sometimes just a little bit is all the definition you need. And again, just concentrating on capturing some of that mustache over there, softening that passage where it just blends into the background. But I still want it to have definition of shape, but keeping it suggested. And cleaning that up. Got to have a little bit of it, not much, but just a little, to give some idea of that definition of the nostril there. And I noticed his cheekbones needed more definition. They had kind of gotten muddied or lost or whatever. So I'm pulling that out a little bit more. And I loved the bridge of his nose, how it came down. I just wanted to make sure that I caught some of that, the defining bone over there, where the zygomatic comes down by the ear. Always concentrating on what you don't see is how much I'm flicking my eye back and forth from my painting to the reference. And if you just take one thing away from this video, do that. You'll learn so much by just checking your reference that way, flicking, flick, 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 back and forth. Okay, so I'm about to get in that ear and get that passage going over there. I do jump around a lot in a portrait because you want to really take the whole thing in as an entire picture and try really hard to capture that unity of the whole scene. Just like in anything, whether you're painting a still life or a landscape, capturing unity without it feeling disjointed is very, very important. Softening, cleaning. Very important. I'm also mentally thinking about atmosphere too, as I'm thinking about the background and where he lives in relation to the edge of the canvas, things like that. So I'm going to focus on the ear now. Looking at the values, there's just I don't know what all the parts of the ear are, but there's these little passages that tuck into other parts, and I'm trying really hard to get just the value notes there as accurate as possible. Using the background to help define the shape as well as the positive shape, negative shape, to really capture that. There's parts too where the ear gets completely lost to the background, and it's the side of the face, so you really don't want to draw the attention there too much. So I'm trying to keep that, suggested, but a little bit of definition, but not too much. And same thing with painting the mouth or the nose. You always paint the surrounding area as well as the object itself. Again, creating that sense of unity and place. It has its place there. The earlobe picks up a little bit of highlight. Ears are a fascinating study if you have sometimes if you're just sitting somewhere where there's a lot of people sitting, it's interesting just to look around at the different ears and different shapes, backs, sides of them. Everybody's are different. And they say your ear and your nose never stop growing throughout your life. So just take that into consideration when you're painting different ages of people. The softened edges, so many soft edges on an ear too. At the top, it's a sharper cartilage type area, so I try to keep that top of the ear, the crest, a sharper edge, with everything else getting to be pretty much lost and softer. Pulling out these highlights. that part too, I don't know what it's called, but that it just was, it picks up the highlight on some people, and in this case I think it was kind of just anatomically, the way it was structured, got that nice spot of highlight, which added an interesting little contour to that area. And there was a passage there too where the crest of the top of the ear just kind of got lost to the hair. I don't know how they were connected, but I loved that connection. So I'm always looking for ways to connect something to something else. And the highlight of that hair was the same value as the ear and the hair in that area, so I connected those two. And here's a close-up of that. You can see it might look more detailed from a distance, but you get up close and it's just really suggested. Using some more of that background to offset on the lit side of the face where I have the strongest highlights, I'll put a darker background behind it. It sets it out from the background a little bit more, and you'll see on the shadowed side of the face, I give him more highlight over there in the background just to really make him pop forward from the background. Someone was asking about no tan, and that is values in black and white. And here is the painting so far in just black and white. And then I also show a clip here of it in 3 values, dark, medium, and light. And these are useful tools that you can do with your painting from an app called Value Viewer. And here is a picture of the app you can get on your phone. You just get this app. I have an iPhone. I don't know if it's available on Androids, but you plug in that app. You can take a picture of your landscape or your painting or whatever. And the reason it's valuable is because you want to see how your painting is holding together in its value relationships. And you don't want all of your light, medium, and dark to be even Steven. You don't want 30, 30, 30 of your dark, medium, and lights. So gauge using that Value Viewer as a tool, depending on what you're painting. If it's a high-key painting, medium range, or low-key dark paintings, that's going to help you gauge your ratios and percentages of your values. The no tan is useful too to see how your overall structure holds together just in black and white. And so I would encourage you to find that app. I think I paid a few dollars for it, just a couple dollars. But I find the more I use it, the more I jump for it, and I think, oh, what would it look like in this? And I'll also take my original photograph, or maybe a still life, the actual photograph of that painting, or not the painting, the image that I'm doing, and I look at that through the Value Viewer just to see how it compares from my painting to reality within that spectrum. Am I getting close? How does the no tan compare to the reality of the no tan scene? And very useful, very strong tool to have in your arsenal of what you're painting. It gives you a greater sense of design and balance composition. And no tan is Japanese, so if you just take and you study Japanese prints, composition that they were doing in their prints, very powerful. You will have a strong sense of design, and you just can't underscore that enough. It'll give you stronger paintings. And of course, in this video here, I am spending more time just discussing values, and so you can't do that without talking about no tan and design. And so look up that app. If you have a Samsung, there may be some alternative, or you can just take your own paintings and turn them into black and white and see where you stand with that. So what I'm doing here, and I think I showed the palette up close, I don't remember, I'm starting to get in the pigments. So I have the white and a little bit of yellow ochre, and I noticed that the edge of that forehead over there needed a stronger highlight. So starting to put that in, cleaning up that shape. I want the forehead to feel like skin is stretched over bone. And so that's kind of always what I'm thinking about there, and getting the highlight on that temporal crest where it turns. And the hair, I always want to think about hair as sitting on top of a skull. and just mass it in, lose it to the background. This is a soft, clean, dry brush. Loosely scumbling, cleaning up. I didn't want it to be too brushworky either, because all those different variations in the brushwork can alter the effect that I'm trying to get. So if I see all this little dabbles with the brush, it's not going to have a cohesive feel of skin. It'll feel like maybe they have freckles or something all over, which freckles are great. I have freckles, but in this case, I don't want it to be distracting with the values. So I think it's a little bit hard to see, but I'm working on just glazing in some color. And that's what I did with this painting, if you remember from about a month ago. I did this exact same approach and then just glazed on color in thin little layers. And so here I am just putting in a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of yellow ochre, just refining some of that shape, value range without losing the values that I had. And I'm starting to play with the mustache a little bit, getting in some of those value ranges that I see over there. It's always a pushing, pulling game. And then just pulling in a little bit more of that. I just took some burnt sienna, thinned it down around the eyes. It just makes it feel more alive when you can start to go from this black and white value to a little glazing of color. In the mustache, I wanted a little bit more gray. You build up facial hair in layers. So as you saw, I started with the value, and now I'm working on kind of getting a yellow ochre, sort of a grayish blue undertone. I'm not getting into the highlights yet. That's at the very end of the painting of the mustache. So as you can see, just the layers underneath, which in the case of this white mustache are more the yellow ochre and then this gray haze. Also concentrating on the shadows that are created by the mustache. So getting those in under his chin, adding some color. I couldn't work on the mustache until I had more color in his neck, because I layer the mustache over the neck. So I had to go back through and put in a little bit of the burnt sienna colors in the neck. When you're painting necks, you want to incorporate some more of that background color into the neck. It'll make it feel like it recedes further back from the face. So I'm just working on the values now under the mustache, around the mouth. I kind of got lucky and didn't have to paint a mouth. They are difficult to do. Lots of little shapes. I like painting them. I like challenges, but you know, what a fabulous mustache. And his eye commands so much attention, so hey, who needs a mouth when you have that kind of stuff going on the face? And I think that there's still a lot of character in what is showing of the mouth to help tell the story too. I don't know, I guess I felt that I needed a little bit more work. Always letting your eyes scan around the painting, taking in what needs work. Sometimes you work on a passage and it gets kind of stale, so you got to just leave it and you can come back to it. And you might see something fresh when you go back. Like I said, this painting was a couple hours long, and so I did it in one sitting, alla prima. And I like doing things alla prima. I think that you have a greater sense of unity if you can. It's not always possible to do a painting in one sitting. Life happens, but if you're able to and you've got the day blocked out, see what you can do in that amount of time, and step away from it and give yourself time to just look at it and think. You might find that it doesn't need to get real fussy. You don't need all the polish. Or, you know, if that's what, sometimes you're doing commissions and that's what your client wants, whatever. But if you have the opportunity just to play for a while and experiment, this is a fun challenge. Trying to get those accents under the chin strong enough so that the neck recedes back and the chin comes forward. You don't want them too dark, or again, it'll have that, it just doesn't sit right. Thinking about that, working on that highlight on his chin, the highlight on his nose. I really want the tip of that nose to come forward, so I hit it with a much stronger highlight in the bridge of the nose. You want that all to come off the face, thinking topography all the time. And the highlight, a little zinger there. And there we are up close. You can see what I'm doing with the color. Very subtle. That cheek just has the slightest bit of Alizarin Crimson on it. Pulling out some more of the highlights around the eyes, or at least that one eye. All right, now I'm kind of working into a little bit more of the mustache finesse, a little more highlights. The temptation is to go crazy and add a lot of hairs and stuff, so it's practicing restraint, what's necessary to tell the story, always saying, what do I need, what don't I need? Now I'm just kind of working that mustache into the neck passage there, losing that. A lot of grays, more neutrals. Again, too, you can look at necks and you can see all kinds of wrinkles and folds and lines. You don't need them. That's not what's going to make or break your painting. Always keeping in mind where you want the viewer to look. I want the viewer to look at the eyes. I want the viewer to feel who this guy was more than, oh, look at all those wrinkles on the neck. That's not necessary. So just keep it focused and keep it loose. Tucking the neck into the collar line. Trying to get that look of the bounced light in the bottom of his chin. Refining that shape. So like I said at the beginning too here on this video, all these paintings that I've been showing you in this video, they're all my portraits, paintings I've worked on over the years, and I love doing portraits. There's so much to painting people that is just fascinating. Fascinating. Humans, people are marvelous. And this painting that I have showing up here quickly here is another painting I did with facial hair, and I just wanted it in this video to show another way you can paint and lose hair to the background and keep things soft and suggested. Lots of fur in this painting. He's very cool painting. So I'm getting back into finishing up the mustache here. Some grays underneath, and gonna layer those back down into the neck. And just keep all that very soft. And then where it turns down, it's cooler. So I am kind of playing, I haven't mentioned very much about playing with the cool and warm variety here in a portrait. Anything that's further away from you is going to be cooler. And the light hitting him, I went ahead and made it warmer. And I wanted the shadows cooler. So I'm just getting this light hitting the top of his mustache. It is a little bit bluer there, but I just wanted it a clean, bright passage there. Thinking about the curls, how they come down and around. Practicing restraint. And I didn't want to lose the different contours of the chunks of mustache. So I'm looking at where they connect to his face. And this is just a quick clip of his hair. As we're talking about hair, facial hair and all this, you can see from here it's very suggested. Very just loose, soft. Not a whole lot to it. Letting a lot of that underpainting show through, because basically when I looked at the photograph or the reference, that was the value and tone that I saw, so I just left it. And I think it has a nice feel of just suggestion. Looking too where the difference, his style just had this interesting little tucked up passage up there behind his head, and so just pulling in some of those darker tones, a little bit of grayer in there. And keeping it soft. You don't want hair to be very distracting in a painting, and just keep it really, like I said before, just on top of the head. Oh, this is a tool that I wanted to share too. It's just a scratching tool. I think it's actually a sculpting tool, but I'm using it just to scratch in a few little hairs here and there. Just a little, and then I'll actually paint some little curls, just a few little curls on top of that. But I like using a scratch tool for mustaches because it kind of creates a little bit of that wiry feel. It's one of those areas too where if a little's good, it's a lot better. No, you don't want to go crazy. Just a few. So I show a close up here real quick of what I just did with the mustache. And here's the little brush. So you can see there's some scratches and some little curly hairs, not much. Cleaning up the collar, putting in a few highlights just to help frame the face in those darker areas, help leading the eye upwards. So that's all I'm working on in here, just refining that passage. I had some fun dribbles and splashes going on with the black of his jacket, but I kind of took those out because it just didn't seem to lend itself to that feel. So I took my reference down, and I'm working on the background here. Working very quickly. I want this background to have atmosphere and a little bit of the vignette quality, just to kind of frame it in. I left the upper left-hand corner a little more open, just to feel like the atmosphere, our visual realm, we can just kind of go out that corner. Opens it up a bit. Again, like I said, that's the shadowed side of his face, so I'm keeping that background a little bit lighter. And I added a little bit of lightness over to there just to help show continuity. I didn't want the canvas divided too much in half. So I do take my brush and I go a little bit up and down and vertical, horizontal strokes. I'm keeping that right back in there. I wanted it a little bit lighter than what I had showing, so I kept that. I added some light. I thought it added a lot by putting that light in there, and I really liked it. So just losing some of that. I didn't want too much variation back there. It seemed like I had a lot of going on in the background, and so I'm keeping it quiet. That's a technical term, right? You know what I meant. So, real quick there, I just added that little with the mustache. I wanted that to have a softer back in there. So here it is done. I don't think I'm going to do much more to this. I like where it is. I like the sort of that loose, unfinished quality. I wanted to thank you guys so much for joining me on this one. It was a lot of fun, and I hope that you enjoyed it too and got something from it. And I thank you guys for your support and all of your encouragement and lovely comments. It really does mean a lot, and I'm enjoying all these videos here with you guys. Thanks so much. All right, well, that wraps up my demo, and I hope you enjoyed this portrait. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I wanted to thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget, if you liked what you saw, to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.